Which I'm angry. Okay, so since no one will introduce myself, I will, well, I can do it even though I think everybody knows me here. So my goal was to speak French, but since the public is like multicultural, I will try to do it in English, even though the part of the text which are written will be in French, so I'll try to translate them. So, and I will maybe use this occasion in order to resume in a certain sense what we did in the last months of our travel, and also in which way it changed our point of view to the experience of the pilgrims, the medieval one. So I'll try to do a sort of double reflection, on one hand on our own experience, what it can bring to the medieval art history, on the other hand, and I would also try then to reflect more in particular on the Mont-Saint-Michel, from more the point of the view of the actual situation. So the name of the lecture was supposed to be the Mont-Saint-Michel to the dreams of the contemporary pilgrims. So we can start with this image, which is like showing us arriving to the holy mountain of the Normandy. And I would say, just to start, that in a certain sense this image is an expression of a short reality, like a couple of hours of walking, seeing the Mont-Saint-Michel, but it's also the materialization of hours, days, weeks and months, and even more of dreams. Because since we decided to walk until the Mont-Saint-Michel, something happened like in our brain, I would say. We start to imagine this meeting, we start to imagine that something special will happen. And then we entered really into this dimension of, I would say, not really fantasy, but something like, which is a crucial process into the human cultural being. You are walking through the space to reach a place, but your expectations are constructed also through the time. So everybody knows, but I will just resume that we did like this part. I'm sorry because the image is not exactly visible, but still it's in large part what we did. So starting from Lausanne, through Conques, Saint-Benoît, Charité, Tours. Finally, we went more to the south until Angers, and then from Angers to the Mont-Saint-Michel. So this long trip in order to meet a place. And of course, the other like central issue for us was, in a certain sense, why this place and what this place was for us. As we discussed it yesterday with Martin Tremmel, our issue was definitely not a religious one. We were not trying to get in contact with relics, and we were also not trying to, in a certain sense, meet a holy place. It was definitely not our goal. Because on one hand, of the like dimension of this pilgrimage, and on the other hand, because in a certain sense, as we told it also yesterday, our goal was not exactly to be pilgrims, but to follow pilgrims. We were absolutely convinced we don't get the capacity to reach, those pilgrims which we are following, but still we are in this like tension between our experience and the fact that we are searching for another experience. And in this sense, although it's like quite unconventional way of doing, we were really working as historians. The goal of the historian, the primary one, is to search for the truth, which he will never reach because it's impossible to go back into the past. And even going into the past, we will for sure not know. I was always imagining if I would have the possibility to go to the Rome of the 5th century, would I get the possibility to understand, why Sixtus III did Santa Maria Maggiore like he did it? I don't think so. On one hand, because it would be really quite difficult to access to Sixtus III just to ask him what were the intentions. And maybe Sixtus was even not really conscious because it was like much more complex. So in this sense, we are reaching something which is impossible to reach, but still this research, this walk is, in a certain sense, the very goal of the historian himself. So then the question is why? Why all those things? And therefore, I would like to construct my presentation trying to ask you several questions. The first one was why walking? since we know for sure that we cannot reach the medieval pilgrims. I mean, we were like running with, I don't know, Usain Bolt. He's running so fast that we don't give him, even it would be like run of all our energy. The second question would be if this walking answers to a certain necessity, an anthropologic necessity of the human being. So if we are walking, not because we want to reach someone, but because we need to walk. And then we arrive, let's say, the third question, which will be why the Mont-Saint-Michel as a goal, why the dreams we can have about this place, and the last question will be if the Mont-Saint-Michel is a place of memory or if it's a object of art. So I will try to structure my presentation those points which I announced to you. I will not show you my structure since I wrote it in French, but let's say with the first walking, a necessity, a human necessity, or a trend, moda. So in the back you see two different pictures, or four, two different ideas. One is like a caricature about the city, the place where we are full of cars, full of stress, because you see those billions of cars with in each car at least one human being in the full stress, like unhappy because he's waiting. And you see also the computer, this flat screen in which the person is like merging through his or her hands. And on the other hand, we have shoes. I would imagine Amalka's shoes because they are very close to the Amalka's one, and a group of persons walking into the countryside. So we have those two realities. On one hand, the city and the virtual world, on the other, the space outside. And of course, the space outside is becoming more and more a contrast to the citizen's culture and also to the virtual reality. I would say that this myth that the countryside, or let's say the landscape, is the opposition to the citizen life is something which we know almost from the antiquity, or not almost. You can read in the Cicero writing, and not only that, I'm like leaving the city Rome, which is full of person and stress, in order to go to the villa and spend beautiful time there. So this dichotomy was always present. On the other hand, let's say since the beginning of the modernity, cities became really the place of the human being life. And crossing France, we realized how important this issue is in two senses. On one hand, that the major part of France we crossed is empty. On the other hand, that the France from the city is completely different than the France from the countryside in terms of how human beings are living and behaving. So that's quite interesting. So the modern post-industrial society is constructed around the being in the city. And moreover, into the last 20 years, and especially last 15 years, with the personal computer who is becoming the epicenter of the human being, except for the, let's say, all the categories of the life in the city, which is full of stress, bad food, not fresh food, few of time, and so on, we will add also the second aspect, which is like less time with human beings and more time into the virtual space, into the virtual reality. So, and in contrast, what was before just the sort of amazing and nice thing for rich persons and in general for persons who are living the city is now becoming something existential, because if there is one place where you could live in a certain harmony with your body, is the countryside where you can walk. Because in the city you walk less and less. If you want to make sport, you have to go in special rooms and then you make your bodybuilding, but you'll not have the occasion anymore to touch your body with something not stressful. I have to confess also to our viewer that I never enter into like those gym places, into the cities, but I can imagine that at least from pictures, that the stress inside of the place is not so different than what is happening outside. That's not a place of peace. So in this sense, the movement and the countryside are becoming for the contemporary person a place of peace, a place where you can, like, in a certain sense, be with yourself at least. You maybe can not accept this aspect. You maybe don't want to stay in peace with yourself, but still you have the possibility. And in this very context that I would like to remember what we discussed several times, which is the pilgrimage road to Santiago. Because if on one hand, the idea of the pilgrimage is a research of yourself in the contemporary world, it was more a religious experience to the past. The today experience of Santiago is at least double. On one hand, you have this aspect of the time which is happening in your body. On the other hand, you have this physicity of the walk in contrast to the citizen life. And what I'm telling is of course confirmed by the anthropological studies, which are like demonstrating that those two aspects are supposed to be superposed. And we can maybe add also another issue which we're also already mentioning in the last discussions, which is this really biologic question, which is linked with what is happening with your body and your brain if you are walking for a certain time. And that's also for me an interesting aspect, since if the results of the biologist and well, people studying human body are exact, it seems to be the case, walking for a long period will really change your brain. And now, after having experienced it for 4 months, I can say that it's right. We get in our group a series of conflicts, of tensions, of very nice moments, of intense affective moments also. And we were often thinking that it's not possible to be so sensitive or to be like so happy or unhappy for things which would not be so important outside. And we also get the tendency to speak about ourselves in a very open way. At least a part of us was capable to like exteriorize, something which would never be done in a normal situation. And I would say that on one hand is of course the experience of the community, we will speak a bit about it, but that on the other hand, it has probably to be linked with the experience of the body which is in the movement, so that this body activate our thinking in a different way. So, and in this sense, the experience of walking is something which is really changing the human being in his biological constitution, and is this link, this bridge between the present and the past. At least it's one aspect which I was thinking to, let's say, present since the beginning of our project, and now I start really to believe it stronger and stronger. Why? Because apart from the fact that the Homo sapiens sapiens is walking almost in the same way, this tendency to enter into the dreams, so this mystical aspect which is activated by the long walk, is the place where the creativity of human being can be like excited. So the creativity into the religious sense of the term, I don't know if into the artistic we can also say, but it's like the place of the creativity. So in a certain sense, we experienced walking for 4 months the places of creativity, for example, into the interactions with other humans, in our thinking about objects. And when we were discussing about those same objects, I think that we were capable to reach horizons which were for us impossible to touch before. So if our, let's say, social, historical and material situation has nothing to share with the medieval past, the experience of something which is changing your brain, opening a possibility to understand in the more deep way the objects you are meeting, it's for me quite similar. So, to resume, the experience of the person who is walking, it's probably one of the rare moments when the human being is detached from the time. So the body is the instrument through which we can, like, in part go out from the time. And then there is the second aspect, which is purely historical. We heard, and everybody can hear it through the lectures of Michele Baggi, the sources from the pilgrims from the 14th, 15th and beginning 16th century reaching the Holy Land. what's for me interesting that in each day description, especially into the practical aspect, but not only, I was like meeting our experience. I don't know if you get also the same experience or the same impression, but what's for me really amazing that if you compare what persons are telling, imagining into the beginning 14th century with some of our, let's say, practical problems and results, it's almost the same. And that's for me quite fascinating, because it means a second aspect that if the body can reach the two moments, the simplification of the life, which is linked to the pilgrimage experience, seems to be a second bridge between the past and the present. So in this sense, and I will put the image you already saw, I would argue that if the local or period I, the period I which is formalized by Michael Baxendale, is something which can be determined by mainly the culture and the society, the experience of the pilgrimage and of the walk is on the contrary something which seems to be supra-historic and is what we did. So my first answer would be, it's possible to cross the history through the embodied experience of the walk. And in this sense, the body is the place where the history can be crossed. So I will not repeat what we already know, which is that there are practical issues which are linked with the body at the center. Like, for example, the fact that we are tired. We experience what it means to be tired, and being tired, we get a completely different and new relationship with the artistic objects, in the sense that if you visit a church and you are tired, you will try to sit down as soon as possible. And sitting down, you will not fall to sleep if you are not Poma. You will not fall to sleep immediately, but you will be in a sort of trance, and we experience it all. I mean, we could say that it's like really a banal impression, because you sit down and you are like really in this sort of trance. But it's also true that in this very situation, you are incredibly more receptive to the visual, oral, and other inputs to you. So the relationship which you have with an image, with a sculpture, if you are in your like fully possession of your energy, and the same object which you meet being completely tired in these trance situations is quite different. And what we know that the medieval sculpture, the medieval concept was probably counting on it, and was trying to adapt the space in order to use this moment of trance in order to like touch the person. So of course we all had the experience, and I will therefore only repeat it in a very brief way, of the Beaulieu situation. We have the big portal of Beaulieu, and there are benches here and here. And sitting on those benches, we can see very well the portal. This point of view, which is the point of view of the person who is sitting in this trance situation, face to face with the Christ, is something which, in my opinion, is really quite exceptional, because the interaction which we can have with him is completely different. So that's something which you already know, and I will not continue in telling, well, I will just briefly say what also we experienced in a very clear way, that with any evidence for the medieval conceptor, it's crucial to combine the place of, let's say, rest with the place of seeing and hearing. The classical example I already mentioned is the Church of Dax, where you have on the apsidal place, the benches for the persons is on the apsidal place because the road was going there. So the goal was to stop the pilgrims. And by the way, it was a genial decision, because as we know, if you sit down once, you will never move anymore after 35 kilometers. And what's for me interesting is if you put on the pilgrimage road 2 benches, those pilgrims will remain in your church for at least the next night. If there will be no benches, you will say, oh, I will maybe continue until the city, because Sample of Dax is just before the city. But you put those beautiful benches, like ideal for a small rest, with, by the way, nice reliefs, nice images, and very nice chapters, capitals you can like see and touch. And the pilgrim is like invited to sit down. And sitting down, he will not move anymore. So in this sense, we can see that the medieval person, the conceptor, experienced the same tiredness we were experiencing, and he knew that it's like a very nice way to seduce the person who is walking. So, therefore, if the tiredness is something important in order to create this trance situation, we can also say from the different monuments we saw that the conceptor was working with this dimension, and I think he was doing it in a like very nice way. And for me, it brings to the second aspect, which is to the object of art, is in a certain sense conceived on very different layers. We know very well some of them. In the second half of the 20th century, it was studied in a very large way, for example, the ideological dimension of the art object, which is why and how a certain person can represent him or herself, himself more than herself, by the way. So there is this idea that you will use the image in order to promote your image. You will use the artistic object in order to declare your hate or your conflict. That was very well studied. We also studied in a very large way the workshop question, who was doing, how it was producing, why he was producing, and so on. And in the last year we entered in another really turn, which is the attention to the polysensoriality of the medieval object, the so-called sensorial turn. So the reflection about how the object is perceived through the senses into the polyphonic context. We know the works of Alexei Lidov, of Bisera Pencheva, who are like the pioneers in this kind of reflection, but which is something still now in process. So I would say that it could be really interesting to add a last layer, which is the layer of the tired body, as a part of the understanding of the conception and the reception of the medieval object. And by the way, the tired body is the key to enter in a very different way into the notion of reception. Because all the other levels I was speaking about were mainly about conception. The workshop who is arriving, the patron who is presenting himself. The creation of the polysensorial space is still at the limit of the conception, and now we can go into the very deep reception, which is ahistoric, and which we could in a certain sense, and that's the second last issue, try to reach even if we are not working with sources, because we have no sources about how was feeling a man or woman of 12th century arriving into the church. We have just no sources. We have, of course, some text which can help us in a very general way, but we have no sources of, let's say, normal lay people entering to the church. What was their impression? What was their fear? What was their state? And which kind of relationship they can have with the image. And as I told at the beginning, it's like the pilgrim which is walking in front of us. We will never reach those persons, but still we have the possibility to have some instruments into the entering, or at least to try to enter in this question of the reception. So, the body and the reception are the two arguments which we started. And then there is the question of the Mont-Saint-Michel, which we reach as the final goal of our walk, and which we reach in those physical and material conditions of the pilgrim who is trying to reach a place and who is arriving to the place. So I will study this beautiful postcard of the beginning of 20th century, and I will immediately say one thing which is for me crucial, is that the contemporary pilgrim is completely different than the medieval one in one point, at least, maybe two. The first point is that there is nothing for us at the Massa Michele in the sense of the holiness. The like pilgrim is arriving to the very place, and our reaction was not the happiness of reaching the holy place, but was in a certain sense a depression of the end of the walk. And that's something crucial, because I was telling before about the unity of the body between past and present, but the, let's say, very big distance into the religious life produced in this sense a huge gap between the past and the present. For us, the Mont-Saint-Michel was in the first days like almost a place of depression because the walk was finished. And in this sense, I would reach what was already done by Anička, which is the question of the walk, of the experience of the pilgrimage as the goal in himself. So I see here a really big gap between the past and the present. For us, the walking in himself was more important than the reaching the holy place. During the way, we were more like receptive to the objects, but when we arrived in front of the goal, when we arrived in front of the Mont-Saint-Michel, we like get disappointed. At least that's my first interpretation. But it can be also different. Why? Because one aspect was the moving body, you can say. The second aspect is the object in his life, in himself. What I want to say with it? That we know that no one of our studied objects, the medieval one, is in some sense like it was. Through the centuries, the objects were radically transformed, and we know it. We are studying it like since a lot of years. We know that except for really very few manuscripts, maybe, and some ivory object, the large part of the medieval past is completely reworked and several times. So what I want to say is that it is possible to just ask the question that the Mont-Saint-Michel effect on us was not linked so much with our experience, but with the object in himself. And I would try to answer this question with some elements we already discussed, some which we still didn't discuss for now. So I will start with the slide, which is like evident. The Mont-Saint-Michel for us is something which is present in the pop culture around us. The comparison between Masaryk is not only declared by the graphists of Peter Jackson, but by the way, Alan Lee, the author of this drawing, maybe not this very one because that's probably from the movie, but the person who was like the first author of the drawing of Masaryk admitted explicitly the inspiration of the Mont-Saint-Michel. And about the Disney, I found some articles speaking about the idea that it was really inspired by the Mont-Saint-Michel, but even if not, it seems to me evident that there is a contamination, a visual contamination between this silhouette and the one of the Mont-Saint-Michel. Well, and what I want to say about it, I want just to say that the object which we reached was for us, even for those who never went here, an absolutely banal, a common silhouette present everywhere. I would say that for Adrian it was even more present because for the beer drinkers, the Mont-Saint-Michel was associated also with the beer. And the commercial dimension of the Mont-Saint-Michel, which I won't like to underline with this image, is something also universally present. Maybe more in France than in the rest of the world, but still. So we reach an icon of the visual pop of the 21st century, and we reach also a place which is like the Prague Castle in a certain sense, a silhouette which we know from many like commercial objects. By the way, and that's the other crucial point, the Mont-Saint-Michel is into the French imaginary, but not only, associated with actual French political situation, and by the way also with a very specific political situation, which is the right wing, the extreme racist right wing France. And therefore Marine Le Pen, the candidate of the presidential elections, started her campaign, in front of the Mont-Saint-Michel with this view, this very view, by the way, I'm sorry to be so art historian, but if you will look, the composition of the mount is perfectly there, only one thing is missing, the angel on the very top, which is cut out, because Marine Le Pen is trying in the last year to, let's say, abandon the Christian roots of France, since France is de-Christianized in a very fast way, and go in a bit different dimension. So we are like in front of the church, and we are denying the religious aspect, cutting out the only religious evident aspect which is visible. What Marine Le Pen said is, in my view, amazing. I'll read it and translate it because it would maybe complete it, what's happening with this place, with this very place, which is the Mont-Saint-Michel. Dans cette somptueuse baie du Mont-Saint-Michel, ce haut lieu même, lieu où l'âme respire amplement, nous voilà devant l'une des merveilles de l'Occident. So the beginning is like very great. In this beautiful bay of the Mont-Saint-Michel, this high place of the soul, this high place, the soul is respiring like deeply, or in the best possible way. We are here in front of one of the marvelous objects of the West. The high silhouette of stones and rocks and rocks, the walls and the tower, which is on the very top, 150 meters. This image of serenity and the power into eternity is pushing us to be humble, is pushing us to the humility. This point where sky and earth are meeting, where sea and sky are a unique word through the centuries, are the point of arrival, longly expected, of the walk of the pilgrims. This very place is today the symbol of the French soul. And she's continuing, quoting Dostoevsky. It's not written here, but she was quoting the beauty which will save the world. So, I would say that what Marine Le Pen taught here was extremely pathetic. I would also say that it was, in a certain sense, bad literature, in terms of literary quality. On the other hand, she was like trying to touch through sentiments, through very superficial sentiments, let's say something nice into human being. The beauties will save the world. This very high place is pushing us into the direction of humility and is the symbol of the French soul. So like really, I would say she was using, in a certain sense, nice stuff in order to start then with the second part of her speech with the classical, very right-wing aggressivity and hate. What is for me then interesting is that is the other case of use and abuse of this place. So we reach a place which is absolutely present in the very actual imaginary. And as you saw, I was showing you 3 different pictures, which were, by the way, working with exactly the same dimension of the Mont-Saint-Michel, which is the silhouette, which is the external image of the mountain. So the object, a big architectural object, which is becoming a simple image. Now, my question is, and I will try to pursue, how did we arrive to that? And also, of course, if these different steps are so crucial for the understanding of what we experienced arriving to the Mont-Saint-Michel. So, just briefly, as you know, this rock is something which is becoming a place of culture since probably the beginning of the 8th century. The first written source, which is like describing the foundation of the Mont-Saint-Michel, is from 820. So in the beginning of the 9th century, there is for sure construction. And then in the 11th and 12th century, the mount is living the highest success. The place, as we heard by Sabina, it's a place where relics of the Archangel are present, but then in the second stage, a series of other important relics arrives, and the Mont-Saint-Michel will become an important place of at least local pilgrimage. Michele Bacci told us in this lecture a few days ago that the Mont-Saint-Michel is not mentioned, but in the main pilgrimage place of the, let's say, Mediterranean and Atlantic Sea during the 14th and 15th century. which can be a sign of the fact that the popularity of the mount was not so high at that period, but I would definitely agree with Sabina that between the 11th and the 12th century it must have been a crucial point. Also because it was a crucial point on the way from England to Rome, the Via Francigena, but also from England to the Santiago, through, let's say, northern way. So therefore, I would say that it's a very important foundation with a crucial dimension in its religious and cultural identity. And also we can see something which is quite typical for the Middle Ages, which is that the superposition of the different relics, it's making this place more and more important. And by the way, as in a certain sense demonstrated by the drawing from the Frère Limbourg, the Mont-Saint-Michel, it's already iconic in his monastic aspect at the end of the Middle Ages. Here we are before 1416, so at least into the French kingdom, the Mont-Saint-Michel is part of let's say, spiritual and cultural imaginary, without any doubt, the 15th century. We see also the attention to the building in himself. You see also, by the way, the ancient abbey, how it was before the distractions of the different centuries. But on the other hand, we can also say, and that's for me interesting, that not only the main silhouette, but also, let's say, the construction of the city in a certain sense didn't change until now. There is like a certain coherence from the 15th century to now. So, the Mont-Saint-Michel was a place of religious piety, was a place amazing because of his strange identity between the sea and the island, but an island which is also a part of the continent when the sea is not there. So, a magic place which is part of the collective imagery already in the 15th century. And then, as you know, there was the second important moment. Sabina already also mentioned it. It was the moment around the French Revolution, when between the suppression of very different monasteries, the Mont-Saint-Michel was also suppressed, but in a very interesting way, this place didn't become a, let's say, place of production of stones, but was not destroyed and became a prison. So we have like several images from this period, 19th century, where Mont-Saint-Michel is a true prison. And for me, it's already interesting because between all places which were like occupied by the revolutionaries, between all the monasteries which were closed and destroyed, and there were a lot of them, Mont-Saint-Michel was not. And okay, we have some practical issues. If you need prison, and they need the prisons, because they had a lot of like person to put into the prison, to the jail, you need also a good place for the prison. And of course, an island is like a very good place in order to put prisoners inside. And by the way, as you know, it's quite dangerous to run out from the Mont-Saint-Michel because the water can arrive in a very fast way. So from the practical point of view, of course, Mont-Saint-Michel was a great place of prisoning. On the other hand, I would still ask myself if there are not other reasons for that. It's just practical issue or there is something else? And I would like suggest now, and I repeat it every other time, that it's not only practical stuff. That even at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, the fascination, which we already saw in the Limburgs, was at that point high that even destroying the function, which is to be a religious place of piety, the object in himself, so the church and the small city, was enough interesting to be conserved because of this aesthetic existence. What's also interesting to the 19th century is that it seems that pilgrims were continuing to arrive to the Mont-Saint-Michel, although they were not visiting the Abbey Church, which was closed. It was a place of prisoner, but in the Church of St. Peter, which is the church like of the village, the relics of the Archangel were present, and persons from Brittany and Normandy mainly were coming in pilgrimage, in local pilgrimage to this place. So that's also interesting because in the certain sense, even if the very heart of the island was like transformed from church and prison, the attraction of this place for religious reasons didn't disappear completely. Well, Mont-Saint-Michel was a prison. By the way, it was the moment of the major increasing of the inhabitants. 1,500 persons were living on the Mont-Saint-Michel. When I was first time reading about the population, I was thinking, oh, that was really amazing how many persons were living on this island. And then I understood that it was because they were not living in a very nice condition, but it was like a full prison. Because when the prison was closed in the 70s of the 19th century, the population like decreased of 1,000 of persons in 1 year. So it was like a very radical decreasing. So a prison empty of its first content and full of another one, which is full of persons. What's interesting that in this period, the Mount is like, for a second moment, and that time rationally, and very consciously remarked by the French public opinion, especially by artists. We have Victor Hugo, who went to the Mont-Saint-Michel, who saw the silhouette, and who was amazed. And under the pressure of Victor Hugo, but not only from him, the decision is like produced to restore the Mont-Saint-Michel and to create from this object a place of history. Because creating or putting the Mont-Saint-Michel on the list of the monuments historiques, we are creating the history. You know, the list of the monuments is a way to say that's already history and that's not. So putting him into the list, you are telling he's a part of history, or it is a part of history. So, and there is also another thing which is interesting. We have those architectures who are working on the Mont-Saint-Michel and who are doing several changing. And Victor Hugo, when he's looking on the Mont-Saint-Michel, which was probably in this state, is speaking about the pyramid between earth and sea. Well, if you see what is happening in the second half of the 19th century, there is something which will change radically the silhouette of the Mont-Saint-Michel. Is this tower which is appearing in the middle. I mean, there was a tower, but they add like the flesh, this point of like 25 meters. So from a sort of pyramid now, we have like a pyramid with a big tower. And the impression which we have with Sabina is that this is not an accidental decision. That's a way in order to change radically the panorama, and changing this panorama, we will change the meaning. And what I mean, if you remember the image of the Walt Disney, which we saw at the beginning, it was a castle. Minas Tirith is a castle. If you will see the illustration of Ivanhoe from Walter Scott, the castles, the true medieval castles, are like a mass with big towers. And by the way, in the 19th century, the neo-romantic castles which are constructed were always like mass with big castle tower. So our hypothesis is that this construction, it's a part of changing the content of the mount from a religious building, the church, to a sort of castle. And it's right that from far, if you see the silhouette, you will suddenly not imagine anymore a church, which is so evident when this part is very high. Now it's like a castle tower. So the like reuse of the Mont-Saint-Michel around the 70s of the 19th century is probably a reason why this place from a sacral one is becoming a laïc, profane one. So that I would say is the second step. And the second step, it's a quite successful one, because through this transformation, and thanks to many intellectual, of course, romantic one, the Mont-Saint-Michel will become a true icon of medieval France. And since into the post-Chateaubriand period, medieval France is the period of the origin of the French culture and identity, the Mont-Saint-Michel, like one of the icons of medieval France, with, of course, Notre Dame, will become one of the place of French national identity. So, through the restoration, we are changing the mind of this very object. And from the place of local identity to the place of national identity, we will go slowly to the place of global identity. So what we met entering to Mont-Saint-Michel, you know it already very well, small place with streets full of crowds of tourists. Why those tourists are coming to the Mont-Saint-Michel? Because Mont-Saint-Michel is a global touristic icon. Into the global tourism, massive tourism, the question is not the place in itself, but is the touristic movement in itself. The production of the souvenirs, which we had the pleasure to sow into the streets of the Mont-Saint-Michel, is almost the same, which we have the pleasure to see in Prague center, in Rome center. I mean, of course, the silhouettes can be different, but in terms of content, we are something really very, very close. Of course, we have la Mer Poulard in the Mont-Saint-Michel, so this iconization of a name which is linked with the past of this very place. But let's say that the consumerist using of this place seems to have added another layer of the construction of the perception of the Mont. And of course, my beloved selfies or photographs are part of this deep transformation of the Mont-Saint-Michel. If I will try to resume what seems to be from today the Mont-Saint-Michel, I would say a very commercial place, quite empty, into the sense that in those streets you're walking through, you have like nice facade. People are not living inside anymore. In this sense, we are in something very close to all the other center of beautiful European cities, because from Prague to Warsaw and to Krakow and of course to the center of Paris and the center of Rome and the center of London, I mean the main important places of the city, the castle and so on, are empty. People are not living there anymore. So we have on one hand empty houses from human being, we have streets which are like medieval, and we have only shops or restaurants, like consumerism and selling almost everything. And if you see the way in which the crowds of tourists are going through the Mont-Saint-Michel, they are, by the way, even not so interested by what they are seeing. They are interested to buy an object, buy a t-shirt, buy the postcard and eat. And then they are interested in this new, like really exponential developed tendency to taking pictures. Selfies or not selfies, but movements or gestures who are transforming the object in a simple image. I was speaking about it at the beginning with the advancement and the question of the Disney image and the Lord of the Rings, but here we have something quite interesting. If you take yourself in selfie in front of the Mont-Saint-Michel, in this sort of really strange fetishism, you will proceed it. I'm not like a historian of media, so I'm not capable to explain what's happening with this obsession for photographing through the smartphones and this obsession for the selfies. I have not the instruments like to do it really. But there is something of strange fetishism when I need to take thousands of pictures with myself, essentially with some objects, pictures which I will never watch anymore after having shared them through Facebook. But the content, it seems to not be so important as the image in itself. So, from the medieval national place, in sense of not the modern nation, through the modern laïc image of national identity, to the global image of a certain consumerism of the tourism, are the three steps which I would say happened into the Mont-Saint-Michel. And therefore, when we arrived to the Mont-Saint-Michel, we were really touched by this completely depolarization of this place. And I would argue that for us this depolarization was even more strong because the other important place we met, Conques, Saint-Benoît-sur-Loire, but also Charité, Nevers, Tours or Angers, were places where the spaces get still the original function. So the Mont-Saint-Michel was the first important place we arrived with a completely switched functions, and not only once, but twice or three times. Well, that could explain what happens to us, in part, the depression to which we arrived, because we were depressed. And of course the depression was so linked with through aggressivity which we lived. We get a really aggressive welcoming in the Mont-Saint-Michel by the persons who are like on the top of the hill. So this aggressivity was also part of this like difficult acceptation for the modern pilgrim who is arriving to the Mont-Saint-Michel and who sees all his dreams, because we had dreams like broken. For me, there is still another question which is quite interesting, because when we decided to go to the Mont-Saint-Michel, we all discussed the fact that it's a mecca of tourism. We discussed several times that we will see into the streets of the Mont-Saint-Michel crowds of tourists. Anna was like preparing herself to film them, so we knew that we will get like thousands of tourists. And we still decided to come to this very place. Why? I mean, there is the possible explanation why we decided to come to this place. Because rationally, okay, we don't want to go to Santiago because of the crowd of the pilgrims who are going there. And we decided to come to the Mont-Saint-Michel where crowds of pilgrims, persons are going to the Mont-Saint-Michel. So why did we decide to come here? I mean, it seems to be a banal question, but in my opinion, it's not one. It was possible to do something different. For example, to start before and go until Conques. Or stop in Saint-Benoît. Or invent another place of pilgrimage. But we decided to go to the Mont-Saint-Michel. So, and now I will arrive to my last part. I will finish quite fast. And it's a question of the power of this place in itself. Because I would argue that we decided, in a certain sense, because of the power of the Mont-Saint-Michel. And I'm not speaking about nor mystical power, nor like obscure power, but of another like quite well described and studied power. I will try to explain it with my last question, which is place of memory or object of art. I think it's not necessary to go very deep into the reflections which, starting from Pierre Nora, arrived to the definition of what a place of memory. I will quote just this short sentence and then we can reflect. Un objet devient un lieu de mémoire quand il échappe à l'oubli et quand une collectivité le réinvestit de son affect et de ses émotions. So, an object can become a place and memory when he escape to the forgetting, thank you, to the forgetting. And when a collectivity give him back his affection and its emotions. So, then the studies about the place of memory were very important since the 80s and 90s, and we basically have to say that one place is place of memory when you are reusing it through generations. In this sense, the Wall of Berlin or the conserved piece of the Wall of Berlin are a classical example of place of memory. Place of memory can also be just a stone. And in Berlin we have some cases like that where you have a stone in the middle of the street and it's written, there was the wall. And you have a small plaque inscribed there and people are coming here in order to celebrate the fall of the wall. So that's a place of memory. As well as we can probably say that, for example, the Church of Christ the Savior in Moscow, it's a place of memory because in four different steps, from the 19th century until the 21st century, this very place was reused by the Russian culture. What's interesting that the place of memory can be also a place where the object in himself is deeply transformed. The case of the Russian Cathedral of Christ the Savior is evident because from the cathedral, Orthodox cathedral, we went to the possible palace of the Soviets, so just the opposite of the religion identity, but in the same very place, to come back in the 90s of the 20th century to the church. And in this sense, the steps which I was describing seems to be the answer. From 15th century to 19th century to 20th century and 21st century, 2017, the Mont-Saint-Michel seems to be reused as a very concrete place of memory. So, do we have an answer? It seems, yes. We have a place which through the centuries, changing the polarity, had a very strange capacity to become a place of memory. And now the question this question is coming from inside, outside, and why? Because in the definition of place of memory, this place don't need to be exceptional. And I would say that in this definition, it's more from outside that importance is coming to the very place of memory. Because if you are speaking about a piece of stone in Berlin, I mean, this piece of stone is just a piece of stone. No one will be interested in a piece of stones. By the way, the parts of the wall are just ugly part of an ugly wall, so no reason to go there, except for the fact that in the collective memory, this stone or this piece of wall had a certain sense. Well, in the Massa Michele, it's maybe more complicated, or it could be. Because, for example, there is still something really exceptional in this place. I was speaking at the beginning about the island, which is also not island. It depends on where is the sea. So we can maybe imagine that, except for the external inputs, there can be something inside. This very special situation of the island, which is not an island, a rare natural miracle, which is like attiring the attention of the persons around. And then the question can be if it will work also from other places or not. And my answer is quite interesting. If we will see Tomberlin, because Tomberlin is the island just close to the Mont-Saint-Michel. Do you see the Mont-Saint-Michel on the background? So Tomberlin is a place where between the 12th, after the 12th century was a church, hermits were living there. It was an important place of devotion linked in a very close way to the Mont-Saint-Michel. So, in terms of, let's say, the natural situation, we are in exactly the same case. Both islands, both becoming like not island when the sea is not there. And one of them, Tomberlin, is just unknown for the word. The second one, it's one of the highest monument of France. If we compare those two islands, I would say that the difference is quite obvious. The difference is the building. Because in terms of the rest, the silhouette seems to me like quite similar. Of course, Tomberlin is a bit smaller than the Mont-Saint-Michel, but still, from the natural point, we are almost on the same case. And then the difference is the object in himself. So, and what I would try to say, what's my argument, is that is this object, which is an object of art, who is making the difference. And who in this very case is more than a place of memory. What I want to say? I want to say that the church, the village, and the silhouette of the Mont-Saint-Michel all together are different layers of culture. This culture is producing an exceptional and unique art object. This art object is powerful because of his own existence. And his power is so high that it can survive through different cultures. The Christian pre-revolutionary culture, the French nationalistic culture of the 20th century, 19th century, to the consumerist postmodern culture. That there is something into the object in himself, but not like a magic power, but an aesthetic value capable to be updated with tiny changement, because they did something in the 19th century, but it was like tiny. It was not a big intervention. To transform this place in a crucial, important place for the European culture and identity. And that's for me something quite interesting, because it can go in something very different than the place of memory. It's of course a place in memory, but the reason of this place of memory is the culture. Culture in the large sense. So, of course, we need persons coming from out who will say that's an important place. But this place is important because of its aesthetic value. And I would maybe conclude it that we decided to come to the Mont-Saint-Michel because of the aesthetic values of this image, which is more than image than a content, more walls than was inside. And we decided to reach this place. It was the very goal of our pilgrimage, to see this powerful object. And our depression was of course linked with the reality of the content with this object, which is for us, at least for me, it's depressing content. I don't think that no one from us 12 was like happy reaching this place, because the place was really depressive. But we decided to come, although we knew that it would be like that, because of the image, of the powerful image. We were like attracted by a powerful image. And I would now say that we were absolutely unconscious about it. And still we are fascinated by this powerful image, because almost each evening is coming now to see the image. We are fascinated by a powerful image, which pushed us to walk for 1,500 kilometers here. Of course, you would walk in different directions. Of course, we were decided to do this experience, but we decided to come here because of this object. So, basta. Thank you. I'm sorry if it was too boring, but you still can have any question. Well, Adrian.
I have two questions which I find really fascinating. And of course, the first is this idea that you're developing with Sabina of the, let's say, a break in the, at least for France, in the tradition of having the place as a religious place.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's replaced somehow by something else.
Mm-hmm.
They invent this notion of heritage, but
Mm-hmm.
one,
Yeah.
to, in a sense, superpose it to this content.
Yeah.
And now, if I understand well, what you argued is that someone has decided that it's aesthetic value which has to be put forward through different cultural...
Oh, they didn't decide it. They were obliged by the object himself.
They were obliged by the object themselves. But do you think, I mean, what's the next step? Are people able to recognize this aesthetic? Or are they just going because other people are going? Or are they just going because some people decided to promote it in the sense of the aesthetic way? This is where it becomes really difficult for me to see where is the conception and where is the real, let's say, reception of it.
Thanks.
Very interesting.
It's a nice question. I would say that both, in a sense. I think that the object is so important because of that you have to invent new reason for visiting it. So that explains that even changing from religious place to prison, they didn't destroy it. That's the first moment when they are like, there was something, they had not like the energy to destroy this place because it was too something. And then it becomes heritage and then more. Okay, so that's something which I would say is coming from the object to the audience. Then of course we are speaking about now commercials, for example. So someone is promoting the image, someone is using this image. But still, the tourists who are coming here are not disappointed. They are like happy. They are taking the beautiful selfie with the mountain and they are happy. Okay, I cannot enter in their brain, but I have the impression that the same situation is produced in Prague, in Rome, and in other places. So that some of those iconic objects, which are always like considered, newly photographed and so on, are because of the aesthetic or cultural value, something so deep in them that, they are like crystallized, being the objects representing what you are expected for this kind of objects. I don't know if I'm clear in answering, but there is something like, because there is this interesting experiment in Czech Republic, which was done like 12 years ago, Český sen, the Czech dream. The question was, what can we do with commercials? And the hypothesis was everything. Okay, they created a myth that a supermarket will open, and that in the supermarket everything will be like 3 times cheaper than everywhere else. And since Czechs are like quite sensitive to the question of cheap things, it was like really, and they made a big commercial everywhere, advertisement, the Czech dream will be open, so on. And they were just 2 crazy guys doing it for a movie. But they had enough money to construct just the false facade of the supermarket. And people come to the opening, like crowd of persons. And then they open it and they were running in the direction of this facade. And then they arrived to the facade and they discovered that it's just a Potemkin village. There is nothing inside. And you cannot imagine the high level of aggressivity. So that's an extreme case, but you can make the commercial you want. If there is not the content you promise, you have a very negative reaction and people will not come back. So now, I would say that from my point of view, there is something really empty into the Mont-Saint Michel. On the other hand, people who are coming here are appreciating, and sometimes they are coming back once more, and they are telling all around, we went there. So I would say that in a certain sense, you are not disappointed by what you are meeting here. There is not this deception. So there must be something which is deeply touching the human being through generations. And I am arguing that that's a visual culture. Because the second island, we saw it like each evening. No one of us had like the desire to go to the second island, or yes? I don't think so. Okay.
So it's like close to the wonders of the world. I mean, world wonder in the sense that it creates instantly a deep connection with the place. Or is it cultural?
Now I would say it's more, no, that's really interesting.
Because we have also people from a completely, let's say, different visual background, we could argue, or cultural background, which are coming in to this place.
And they are amazed by this place. Well, that is one part. It could be the fascination of Europe. So if it's like considered as an image of European culture for Asiatic person or African, it could be interesting because it's Europe. On the other hand, that could be really interesting to imagine that this kind of visuality had such a power that it can be acceptable also for persons outside from our culture. But of course, then I understand there is really big tension between the myth and the power of the myth. Because if you go to Rome, you have to see the Colosseum, even though you are not interested, especially in this kind of building. But the narration which is constructed about the object is so important that you are forced to. With the Massa Michele, I would say it's more interesting because there is not such a big narration. I mean, Colosseum, Fontana dei Trevi are places of high narration. I mean, Fontana dei Trevi, thanks of Fellini, is something completely different because at least through the mediation of other media, everyone of us had seen the beautiful scene with the beautiful blonde woman entering into the Fontana dei Trevi. I mean, it's part of the shared European and world cultural heritage. And Mont-Saint-Michel had not this value. I even don't remember if I saw a movie with the Mont-Saint-Michel inside. I don't know. So, are there any other questions?
But I'm still asking myself how much this image is created, or it's composed. On the one hand, you have the monument and the historical value, but there is still this dimension, natural one. Like it's a sort of miracle that sometimes it's an island and sometimes it is not. And not many monuments in the world have this sort of very
miracle, yeah.
extraordinary natural characteristics. So I think it's a very big part of the image constructed about Mont-Saint-Michel, because then it's always very strange with these capital cities that they are becoming these huge magnets for tourists. And you, like when we were traveling here, we stopped at Reims just to see the cathedral, and then you ask yourself why Paris is so much more visited than the other cathedrals that maybe are even like
nicer
or more accomplished, or I don't know what, less reconstructed or stuff like this. But then that's a different question. But still, when we switch to this one, I think the natural element there is really very, very important.
But I plenty agree with you. The natural element is part of the game. And there is, of course, not only the fascination because of the island, not island, but also something into the liminality. It's nor island, nor land. It's nor water, nor sky. I mean, the Marine Le Pen dichotomy was not so stupid. I mean, this construction between sky and water, island and land, is something which makes sense, and I agree it's part of the myth. But what I wanted to underline with this image, that you need a culture. In order to transform the island in something really special, the culture, and I would say the visual culture and the artistic culture and the object of art is the difference. Because you have plenty of natural great objects, which are, by the way, visited. I was thinking also about, well, for example, in Australia, this huge stone in the middle of the desert visited by billions, thousands of persons. But the magnetism of the place where you have this cultural level seems to me like augmented because it's touching something more than the stones and the trees where Martin was speaking about. So that's something for me like exceptional in this side. And also really for me the question is why we decided to come here. It was at a certain point I was realizing that we decided to come in a place which in a certain sense we were hating, like the content, you know. And we decided to come here, and I think we were all conscious about it. I mean, no one of us had illusion that we will like meet beautiful persons, nice, like, I don't know, you know, we were like, and when they aggressed us entering to the Mont-Saint Michel, I was disappointed in one sense. On the other hand, I was not happy, but I was like satisfied that I was expecting it to be bad, and it's really bad. Yeah.
I don't know, it also like I also contributed to be full of the tourists and everything, but still you are kind of attract like, so I would like to see on my own eyes what it's created or what is the power of the place, even though we expect it to be crowded and that you will like meet a lot of tourists there. Still there is like also the object which you want to see, and it also has kind of power, like of course it's not on the island like this, but I mean also the Finisterre is very close and like the environment around is kind of, yeah, but maybe it's also like in this entirety it's very different because of the exactly of the memory, like in itself there is like also like nothing that special, but you really feel the atmosphere or something. And with this nature aspect that you pointed out, it also reminded me that there is, maybe it's too far, but it's a little bit like with these amphitheaters in Greek, which are also like very visited, very like symbolistic symbols for the Greek history or something like this. And they are also like built in very special nature environments, where you have really an amazing view on the sea, or there is really something special like in natural way. Therefore, probably also the amphitheater was built there because it was also connected with the sunrise and like with all the events which were like performed there. And it's still very very visited because of the maybe of the memory of the renovation, and it's attracted even though it's completely empty. And yeah, like this power of the nature of this like magical place, I think it's very important.
No, but it's like well, back to the question of the let's say non-cultural. It's finished. Now it's like a bit the question of the what Martin was trying to speak about, this interaction between the landscape and the human presence.
Yeah, also the fact that they're like
Now, for me, it's like really interesting that there is something in this polyphony, harmony, which is probably capable to touch the human being in a very exceptional way. Because there is a harmony. I mean, for sure. The beauty of what's around, and I'm using the word beauty even though now it's like almost forbidden, but still, the beauty, with the elegance of the object, which are like designing together this unique, powerful image. And I'm speaking about image mostly because we lose the content, really. I mean, it was a church once, then it was a prison, then it was a place of national identity, and at that point it was already more a postcard than the content. And now, I mean, I don't know what's inside. Of course, we met the Fraternity of Jerusalem on the very top. It's very nice what they are doing. And they are giving a sort of content, but a very small one in comparison of the amount of tourists and crowds who are coming there. So from like content to image, but still a powerful because of this harmony between nature and the object.
Yeah, it goes in the same direction, but because we speak about the image which is the 19th century creation, but those places which exists for a very long time, is also the points where we can meet with our ancestors.
Mm.
And it's in a very strong way in the sense that we can also recognize, still few centuries after, I mean many centuries after, why they chose the place and how they chose it in a very deep and conscious way with also the natural environment. And
Mm.
in these rare places, I mean, I don't know, you can argue Stonehenge or some places.
Yeah.
It's the same, they were choosing those places not out of pure luck and not only out of aesthetic reasons, but for deep connection also with the nature. And in this sense, also with the lecture of Martin, I think it's also this symbiosis which we lost and still we are able to reconnect with.
No, that's
Even if it goes through the place of memory and through the 19th century.
No, that's interesting because you are doing something forbidden. I hope that no one is like watching now because Adrian said a pure heresy in terms of objective sciences. The polarity of the place is a forbidden concept. No, I'm sorry. Because it's absolutely not objective. You cannot measure if a place had or not a polarity, even though persons are trying to measure it, but still it's like almost impossible. But I would agree with you, even if you like forbid, I mean, let's don't speak about the polarity of the power of the place, like natural magnetic power, but it's true that there are places which are touching the Homo sapiens imaginary or internal world in a quite different way. I would not know why. I mean, I'm not capable to, it's more an anthropologic word. But probably the artistic experience, the visual experience can be part of those elements who are touching, like, or which are touching the human being, the Homo sapiens in a very special way. So, something in the brain which is happening. And that's for me really interesting. Because it maybe can explain also the gap between the artistic experience of today and the past. When the art, like the conceptual one, decided to don't use aesthetic elements anymore, something was broken. But here we have this connection between the aesthetic feeling and let's say the natural place. Okay, are there any other questions? No? So then I will conclude. Thank you for your attention.